Looking back, our life together felt like a well-composed melody, each note perfectly in tune. Our laughter filled the spaces between us, and our plans, our shared dreams, gave us purpose. Our home was a gallery of memories, with Lena's paintings brightening the walls, and photographs from trips and milestones reminding us of the life we'd built. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. But it wasn't. I thought it was enough. The restaurant was a favorite, not just because of the food, but because of what it represented. It was where I'd proposed to Lena, kneeling awkwardly by the table as the waiter pretended not to notice. Now, 5 years later, I had the same butterflies in my stomach, though for a very different reason. I'd spent weeks planning this anniversary, even buying her a bracelet she'd admired in passing. I wanted the evening to be unforgettable. Lena sat across from me, swirling her wine absently, her eyes fixed on the flickering candle between us. Something about her demeanor was off, but I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe about her latest gallery opening or some new idea she couldn't quite capture on canvas. She had always been intense, her mind a whirl of colors and abstract thoughts, and I loved that about her. I exited the waiting room and walked down the stairs. We chatted about the usual things, work, friends, her upcoming show, but as the meal progressed, her responses grew shorter, her gaze more distant. The Lena I knew, who was always animated when she spoke about her art, seemed muted tonight, as though the vibrant hues of her personality had dimmed. "You okay?" I asked, breaking the silence that had stretched too long. She looked up quickly, startled, and forced a smile. "Yeah, sorry, just thinking." "Good thoughts, I hope." I tried to lighten the mood, but my chest tightened as she hesitated. "Don't know." She set her glass down and folded her hands in her lap. Her lips parted as though she were about to speak, but no words came. "Lena," I said gently, leaning forward. "What's going on? You've been quiet all night. Is it?" She exhaled deeply, her shoulders slumping. There's something I've been wanting to talk to you about." The way she said it, slow, deliberate, sent a ripple of unease through me. My mind raced, trying to predict what was coming. Was she unhappy with her career? Her health? Did she want to start a family sooner than we'd planned? "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," she continued, her voice soft but firm. "About us. About me." I didn't say anything, letting the silence urge her on. "I feel like there's a part of me that's missing," she said, her eyes fixed on her hands. "I love you, Alex. You have to know that. But I need to explore who I am outside of this marriage." Her words landed like a punch to the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard her correctly. "Explore?" I repeated, my voice tight. She nodded, her expression earnest. "I need to see what's out there, to experience things I've never allowed myself to before." "Jesse." I sat back in my chair, stunned. Are you saying you want to leave?" he asked. "Yes." "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I don't want to leave. I want us to stay together. But I think we should consider opening our marriage." "Opening our marriage?" The words echoed in my head, absurd and foreign, like hearing someone speak in a language I didn't understand. "Lena," I said slowly, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Are you asking for permission to be with other people?" "It's not just about that," she said, her voice pleading. "It's about connection, self-discovery. I feel like I've lost a part of myself and I need to find it again. This isn't about replacing you. It's about becoming the best version of myself. For both of us. In the best version of herself." The phrase felt like a slap. I stared at her, searching her face for some sign that this was a joke, a test, anything but what it seemed. But her expression was resolute, her eyes unwavering. "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to keep it controlled. "You're talking about self-discovery like it's some noble pursuit, but what you're really saying is that you want to sleep with other people while I sit here and cheer you on. Do you honestly think that's going to make us stronger?" "Alex, please," she said, glancing around the restaurant. "Keep your voice down." I didn't care who heard. The humiliation was already unbearable. "Why now, Lena? Why tonight? Why not bring this up when we were at home, in private?" "I thought this would be easier," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I thought you'd understand." "Understand?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "I don't even recognize you right now. The woman I married wouldn't do this. The woman I married—" My voice trailed off, the weight of my own words crushing me. "I'm still that woman," she insisted, reaching across the table for my hand. I pulled back instinctively, the pain too raw to let her touch me. "No, you're not," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That woman wouldn't ask me to sit here and watch her destroy everything we've built." "Are you all right?" The silence between us was deafening. She looked down, tears glistening in her eyes. But I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. Not now. "I need air," I said abruptly, standing up. "Alex, wait." I didn't let her finish. Grabbing my coat, I walked out of the restaurant, the cold night air hitting me like a wall. My mind was a whirlwind of disbelief and anger, but beneath it all, a quiet, persistent ache was taking root. How had we gotten here? How had the life we'd built together, our plans, our love, become so fragile, so disposable? I thought of the bracelet still in my pocket, the one I'd planned to give her tonight. I clenched it in my hand, the sharp edges digging into my palm. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that the woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd built my life around, might not exist at all. "This is true, Harry," she said. The glow of the candlelight did little to soften the sharp edge of Lena's words. They hung in the air between us, raw and unapologetic, cutting through the quiet intimacy of the restaurant. "I think we should consider opening our marriage," she said again, her tone deliberate, as if repetition might make it easier for me to accept. But my grip tightened around the stem of my wine glass, my knuckles pale against the dark crimson liquid swirling inside. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard her correctly. Maybe the noise of the restaurant had distorted her words, or maybe this was some elaborate misstep in communication. "Opening our marriage," I echoed, my voice a flat monotone. "No." She nodded, her gaze steady now, her earlier hesitation gone. I stared at her, my mind grasping at threads of normalcy that felt like they were slipping through my fingers. Moments earlier, we'd been laughing about how the waiter had spilled a drop of wine on the pristine tablecloth. Just moments earlier, we'd been reminiscing about our wedding vows and a honeymoon in Paris that neither of us wanted to end. "Lena," I said, struggling to keep my voice calm, "what exactly does that mean to you?" Her lips pressed together before she responded, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. "It means I want the freedom to explore who I am outside of us, to connect with people in a different way without it taking away from what we have." My stomach churned. "So, you're saying you want to see other people?" "It's not that simple," she said quickly, leaning forward. Her voice dropped to an almost conspiratorial whisper, as though softening the words would dull their impact. "I'm not talking about leaving you, Alex. I love you. I always will. But I feel like I've been holding back parts of myself, and I need to understand those parts better." "You mean by sleeping with other men?" "Not just that," she said, frowning. "It's about connection, intimacy, growth. I think this could make us stronger in the long run." The words made my head spin, their absurdity sparking a heat in my chest that threatened to consume me. Stronger. How could she possibly think this would strengthen anything? Stronger? I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. Lena, do you hear yourself? You're asking me to sit by while you, experiment with other people. How does that make us stronger? Do you even realize what you're asking me to accept? Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but I couldn't find the energy to care. Alex, this isn't about replacing you. It's about understanding myself, about growing as a person. I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that felt foreign in my throat. So what am I supposed to do while you're off understanding yourself? Sit at home and wait for you to come back? Pretend everything's fine while you go on dates? Or whatever it is you think this means? It's not about pretending, she said softly, her tone pleading now. It's about honesty, transparency. I don't want secrets between us. That's why I'm telling you this now, instead of doing it behind your back. The absurdity of her logic left me momentarily speechless. Was this supposed to be a kindness? A gift? Her way of sparing me the humiliation of discovering her infidelity on my own. I set my glass down with a deliberate care I didn't feel. The flicker of the candle caught in the liquid, casting a blood-red glow against the pristine white tablecloth. I feel as if I have two people inside of me. How long have you been thinking about this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. A few months, she admitted. I've been wrestling with it, trying to figure out the best way to tell you. And this is the best way? I asked, my voice rising despite myself, springing it on me during our anniversary dinner. Alex, please, she said, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Keep your voice down. The irony of her request wasn't lost on me. She could dismantle our marriage in public, but God forbid I raise my voice. Thelma is a decent person. I can't believe this, I muttered, leaning back in my chair as though distance would make this nightmare easier to bear. Do you even understand what you're asking of me? You're asking me to stand by and watch while you... I trailed off, unable to finish the thought. I'm not asking you to watch, she said, her voice breaking. I'm asking you to trust me, to trust that this will make us stronger. I don't want to lose you, Alex. I love you. You love me? I repeated, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. If you love me, why am I not enough? Why do you need more? Her tears spilled over then, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. It's not about you, she whispered. It's about me. I'm lost, Alex, and I don't know how to find myself without this. She drew back a few steps and offered him her left hand to push his black hair back from his face. Her confession should have softened me, should have made me want to hold her and tell her we'd figure it out together. But all I felt was anger. Anger and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I can't do this, I said finally, my voice shaking. I can't sit here and listen to you tell me that our life, our marriage, isn't enough for you. No, I said, cutting her off. You've said your piece. Now you need to think about what you're really asking for. Because if you go down this road, Lena, there's no coming back from it. Her tears fell harder, but I couldn't stay to watch. I grabbed my coat, my movements jerky and uncoordinated, and stood. Where are you going? She asked, her voice cracking. Hey, Luca. Anywhere but here, I said, not looking back as I walked out the door. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but it did little to clear the storm raging in my mind. Her words echoed in my head, each one carving fresh wounds I wasn't sure would ever heal. I watched her grind to the far end of the karting yard. The hum of the car engine was the only sound breaking the silence. I hadn't bothered turning on the radio, Even the idea of music felt wrong, too intrusive in the wake of what had just happened. The air inside the car was stifling despite the cool night outside, and I rolled down the windows, hoping the rush of wind would clear my head. It didn't. The city lights blurred as I drove through empty streets, no destination in mind, only the need to keep moving. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to, my knuckles white, as if the force alone could keep me from spiraling. Opening our marriage. Her words looped in my mind like a cruel mantra, each repetition sinking deeper into my chest. I couldn't reconcile them with the Lena I thought I knew, the woman who laughed so easily at my dumb jokes, who kissed my forehead each morning before I left for work, who painted vivid worlds filled with color and life. I pulled into a deserted parking lot and killed the engine, the sudden silence deafening. Leaning back, I closed my eyes and let the night swallow me. Images flooded my mind, unbidden and sharp as glass. I saw Lena on our wedding day, her smile radiant as she walked toward me down the aisle, her hands trembling slightly as I slid the ring onto her finger, her voice cracking when she said, "I do." I'd never felt more certain of anything in my life than I did at that moment. She whispered, "And we will find it, Ingela." Then came the smaller memories, the quiet, intimate ones that made up the fabric of our life together. Sunday mornings spent in bed, the sunlight filtering through the curtains while we talked about nothing and everything. The way she would hum to herself while cooking, often forgetting an ingredient because she got lost in her thoughts. The way she'd sit on the floor of her studio, surrounded by her paints, her hair messy and her face streaked with color, completely absorbed in her work. Had all of it been a lie? Or worse, had it been real, only to be undone by her need for something more? I gritted my teeth, the ache in my chest growing sharper. The question lingered, twisting itself into every corner of my mind. I'd worked so hard to build a life with her, to make her happy. I'd been her biggest supporter, her anchor when the chaos of her creativity threatened to overwhelm her. Was that not enough? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small velvet box I'd brought to the dinner, the one with the bracelet she'd admired weeks ago. I stared at it, the weight of the gesture now feeling absurd, pathetic even. The thought of giving it to her now made my stomach churn. Ooh. With a frustrated growl, I tossed the box onto the passenger seat, the motion more satisfying than it should have been. It felt ridiculous to hold on to something so trivial when my entire marriage was unraveling. Sula's head cocked. My phone buzzed on the console, its screen lighting up with Lena's name. I didn't pick it up. I couldn't. What could she possibly say that would make this better? That would erase the image of her sitting across from me, calmly explaining how she wanted to dismantle the life we'd built together. "We have to get out of here," Ripper said to me. Instead, I turned the phone face down and started the car again. The urge to keep moving, to escape, was overwhelming. The streets grew emptier as I drove further out of the city, the towering buildings giving way to dark stretches of road flanked by trees and fields. My mind raced alongside the car, replaying every moment of our relationship, searching for the cracks I must have missed. Was it my long hours at work, the nights I spent coding instead of sitting with her in the studio? Had she been lonely and I was too blind or too complacent to notice? Or was it simpler than that? Maybe it wasn't about me at all. Maybe Lena's restlessness was something that had always been there, something she'd never shared with me until now. The thought didn't comfort me. If anything, it made me feel even more helpless, like I'd been set up to fail from the start. By the time dawn began to break, I found myself parked by a lake on the edge of town. The water was still, its surface reflecting the pale light of the rising sun. It was quiet, peaceful, and entirely at odds with the storm raging inside me. I stepped out of the car, the cool morning air biting at my skin. My legs felt heavy, unsteady as I walked toward the water's edge. The sky shifted from gray to soft pink, the kind of beauty that Lena would have rushed to paint, her fingers already smeared with color before the scene was fully formed. My sack lifted by itself on the hooks on my back as I moved toward the water's edge. A lump rose in my throat, unbidden and unwelcome. I swallowed hard, refusing to let it surface. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to curse her for destroying everything we'd built, for turning our anniversary into a spectacle of betrayal. But more than anything, I wanted to understand. I wanted to go back to the restaurant, to grab her hands and demand answers that would make sense of it all. But no answer could undo the damage. No explanation would make her words hurt less, or bring back the certainty I'd once felt in us. As the sun climbed higher, I turned back to the car, exhaustion finally catching up with me. My reflection stared back at me in the window, a man unmoored, a man who wasn't sure where he belonged anymore. I turned to place the bags on the passenger seat. Lightly, I got in and closed the door, the engine's hum a hollow comfort as I started the drive home. I didn't know what I'd say to Lena when I saw her again, or if I'd say anything at all. All I knew was that something had shattered between us, and I wasn't sure it could ever be put back together. The morning after the dinner, I sat in my kitchen, staring into a mug of coffee that had gone cold. The events of the night before replayed in my mind, looping like a bad song I couldn't escape. Lena had already left for her studio, leaving behind nothing but silence and the lingering weight of her words. Once Melissa had promised me scotch, I had been happy with my escape. He couldn't think straight. The walls of our home, once warm and comforting, now felt oppressive, like they were closing in on me. I needed perspective, someone to help me untangle the mess of emotions threatening to swallow me whole. Noah's name came to mind immediately. He'd been my best friend since college, the one person I could count on to tell me the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I grabbed my phone and sent him a quick text. Need to talk. Urgent. Speed cost. Those who have gone before will see it safely. His response was almost immediate. Meet at the diner. Half an hour later, I slid into a booth at our favorite Greasy Spoon, the smell of bacon and coffee thick in the air. Noah was already there, a steaming mug in hand, his dark hair still mussed from sleep. You look like hell, he said as I sat down. Thanks, I muttered, rubbing a hand over my face. He leaned back, studying me with a mix of concern and curiosity. All right, Spill. What's going on? I hesitated, the words caught in my throat. Saying it out loud felt like admitting it was real. It's Lena, I started, my voice low. She told me last night that she wants to open her marriage. I stood still, stunned. Noah's eyebrows shot up, his mug frozen halfway to his lips. She what? Other lives with a family member who has depression. Beth Sheldon says it's about self-discovery, about making our marriage stronger. Jesus, he said, setting the mug down with a soft thud. That's a lot. Huh? I said bitterly, staring at the table. You think? He was quiet for a moment, his expression shifting to something more serious. Did she say why? I mean, did she give you a reason? She says she feels like she's losing herself, I replied. Like there's this part of her that she hasn't explored yet, and she thinks this is the way to do it. Noah let out a low whistle. I walked out, I admitted. I couldn't deal with it. I spent the whole night driving around, trying to make sense of it. He said to her, "Did you talk to her this morning?" "Are you going to?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "What do I even say?" How do you have a conversation with someone who thinks this is a good idea? Noah leaned forward, his arms resting on the table. Look, man, I don't know what's going on in her head, but you need to tread carefully. Don't make any rash decisions. Talk to her. Figure out if this is something she's been feeling for a while or if it's just, I don't know, a phase. Phase? I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. You think wanting to sleep with other people is just a phase? I'm not saying it makes sense, he said quickly. I'm just saying you need to get to the root of it before you decide what to do. If you blow up now, you could make it worse. His words were logical, but they didn't make the knot in my chest loosen. What if I can't handle it, Noah? What if this is a deal breaker for me? Then you need to be honest about that, he said firmly. But don't let anger make the decision for you. Take some time. Think about what you want, what you need, before you go back to her. I nodded slowly, though his advice didn't feel like the clear solution I'd hoped for. Thanks, I muttered. She resigned. Anytime, he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. As I left the diner, I felt marginally lighter, though the weight of the situation still pressed against my chest. I wasn't sure what I'd do, but at least I knew I didn't have to face it alone. Meanwhile, across town, Lena was confiding in her own ally. Celia, her closest friend and fellow artist, had always been a free spirit, her life an ever-changing kaleidoscope of lovers, travels, and impulsive decisions. Did you tell him? Celia asked as she poured herself another glass of wine, her studio cluttered with half-finished sculptures and canvases leaning against the walls. Lena nodded, curling up on the worn sofa. I told him last night. He didn't take it well. Celia rolled her eyes. Of course he didn't. Men never do. They want you to fit into their little box, to be the perfect wife who never asks for more. It's not like that with Alex, Lena said defensively. He's a good man. He's always supported me. And he should support this, Celia countered. This isn't about him. It's about you. You deserve to explore what makes you happy. But what if I hurt him? Lena's voice wavered, and for a moment, doubt flickered across her face. Her hand flittered up to caress her child. Hurt is part of growth, Celia said matter-of-factly. If he loves you, he'll understand. And if he doesn't, well, maybe it's time to ask yourself if you're with the right person. Lena fell silent, her mind churning. Celia's words were both comforting and unsettling, amplifying the storm of emotions she'd been wrestling with for months. Unbeknownst to either of them, their conversations, mine with Noah, hers with Celia, were setting the stage for battles yet to come. While I was trying to steady myself in the wake of Lena's revelation, she was being urged further down a path I couldn't follow, and neither of us could see where it would lead. Lena was in the kitchen when I got home that evening, humming softly to herself as if nothing had happened. She was chopping vegetables for dinner, her back to me, the rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board oddly soothing in its normalcy. For a brief moment, I considered letting it go, pretending the previous night had been a bad dream, but the knot in my chest wouldn't allow it. I set my keys down on the counter with more force than necessary. The sound made her pause, and she turned, her expression cautious. "Hey," she said softly, like she was approaching a wounded animal. "Hey," I replied, leaning against the counter opposite her. "We need to talk." She set the knife down, wiping her hands on a towel. I figured we might. The calmness in her voice unnerved me. She looked ready, as if she'd rehearsed this conversation in her head 100 times. I spent the night driving, I began, trying to keep my tone even. "Thinking about what you said." True," Nancy sighed. "And?" she prompted, her brow furrowing slightly. "And I can't wrap my head around it, Lena," I said, letting the frustration seep into my words. You sat across from me on our anniversary and told me you want to explore, like it's some self-help exercise you can check off a list. It's not like that, she said, her voice tinged with exasperation. Alex, I'm trying to be honest with you. Isn't that what you've always wanted? For us to be open with each other? Who's open about what, Lena? I snapped, my voice rising despite my effort to keep it steady. About how you think our marriage isn't enough? About how you want to sleep with other people and expect me to just accept it? It's not just about sex, she insisted, her eyes pleading. I told you, it's about understanding myself, about finding parts of me I feel like I've lost. And what about me? I shot back. What about the parts of me you're breaking with this? You're asking me to stand by while you dismantle everything we've built together. Do you even realize what you're doing? She looked away then, her fingers twisting the edge of the towel in her hands. I don't want to hurt you, she said quietly, but I can't ignore this. If I do, I'll resent you. I'll resent us. The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a physical force. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand she take it all back, but I knew she wouldn't. This was who she was now, and no amount of anger or pleading would change that. If this is what you want, I said finally, my voice cold and unfamiliar, then you can't stay here. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. What? You heard me, I said, crossing my arms. If you're going to pursue this, whatever it is, you need to move out. I'm not going to sit here and watch you come and go, pretending this is normal. It's not. Alex, this is our home, she said, her voice breaking. You can't just ask me to leave. I'm not asking, I said firmly. I'm telling you, if you want to explore, fine, but not while you're living under this roof, not while you're still wearing the ring I put on your finger. What? Tears welled in her eyes, but I forced myself to look away, to harden my resolve. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, her voice trembling. I nodded slowly. Celia's, I said without hesitation. You two seem to be on the same page about this. She flinched at the mention of her friend, but she didn't deny it. For a moment I thought she might argue, that she might push back and insist on staying. But then she nodded, a single resigned motion. Okay, she said softly, if that's what you want. It's not what I want, I snapped. What I want is for us to fix this, to figure out where we went wrong and put it back together. But you've made it clear that's not on the table. I'm sorry. Her tears spilled over then, but she said nothing, simply turning back to the cutting board and resuming her work. The sound of the knife against the wood felt like nails on a chalkboard, and I pushed off the counter, heading for the bedroom. I spent the rest of the evening in a fog, packing some of her things into a spare duffel bag and leaving it by the front door. I heard her moving around in the kitchen, the clink of dishes and the murmur of her phone calls, one of which I assumed was to Celia. By the time I emerged, the bag was gone, and so was Lena. The house felt impossibly quiet in her absence, the stillness oppressive. I sat on the edge of the bed we'd shared for years, staring at the empty space where she used to sleep. I didn't know if I'd done the right thing. All I knew was that I couldn't let her stay, not when every glance, every word, would remind me of what she was taking away. It was the first night I spent alone in our house, and it wouldn't be the last. The decision to hire a private investigator hadn't come easily. It felt underhanded, invasive, like a violation of the trust that had already been shattered. But after days of silence from Lena, punctuated only by brief, meaningless texts about when she might swing by to grab more of her things, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more she wasn't telling me. Noah had called it a necessary evil, a way to protect myself from being left completely in the dark. "You need to know what you're dealing with," he'd said. "If she's seeing someone else, better to face it now than later." So I'd made the call. The investigator, a gruff man named Garrett, listened patiently as I explained the situation, his voice calm and professional as he assured me he'd seen cases like mine before. It didn't make me feel better, but it steadied me enough to proceed. The days that followed felt like a slow-motion car crash. Garrett provided regular updates, his reports cold and clinical. Lena's routines were laid bare. She spent her mornings at Celine's apartment, afternoons at her studio, and evenings elsewhere. It was the elsewhere that made my stomach churn. "She's been spending a lot of time with a man named Victor," Garrett told me during our second phone call. "He's a gallery owner, mid-40s, successful, divorced. They've been meeting at his gallery after hours, as well as a couple of restaurants, and his home." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my grip on the phone tighten, my knuckles aching. "His home," I repeated, my voice hollow. "Yes," Garrett confirmed. "She's been there 3 times in the past week. She stays late." The room spun around me, and I had to steady myself against the edge of the counter. "Overnight." The word lodged itself in my throat like a jagged stone. I'd suspected this might be the case, but hearing it out loud, having it confirmed, made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. "Do you have proof?" I asked, my voice cold and unfamiliar. "Sir." "Photos, timestamps, detailed logs," Garrett said. "I can send them over whenever you're ready." I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready. But I forced myself to say, "Send them." When the email came through later that evening, I stared at it for what felt like an eternity before opening it. The first image was of Lena and Victor outside his gallery, her smile radiant as she leaned into him. Another showed them seated at a dimly lit table, his hand resting casually on hers. But the one that broke me was taken outside his house, Lena standing at the door, Victor's hand on the small of her back, guiding her inside. I closed my laptop, my chest heaving as I fought to keep my composure. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the ease with which she seemed to have moved on, as though our life together had been nothing more than a stepping stone to something or someone better. Noah called later that night, his voice concerned as soon as I answered. "Did Garrett get back to you?" I asked. "Yeah," I said, my throat tight. "And she's seeing someone," I admitted, the words bitter on my tongue. "A gallery owner. Victor." "Right," I said. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a low whistle. Damn. I'm sorry, man. I really am." "Well, I don't even know why I'm surprised," I said, the bitterness bubbling over. "She's been talking about needing to explore, needing to find herself. I guess Victor's her answer." Her hand curled into a fist, her eyes pleading with mine. Silence glowed until the sound of laughter cracked. "Maybe," Noah said carefully. "But you need to focus on you now. She's made her choices. You need to start making yours." He was right, of course, but the truth of it only deepened the ache in my chest. For 5 years, Lena had been my partner, my other half. Letting go of that wasn't something I knew how to do. But as the hours dragged on, the anger began to replace the sadness. Anger at Lena for betraying our vows, for dragging me through this mess without a shred of consideration for what it was doing to me. And anger at myself for holding on so tightly to something that was clearly broken. I was dead to my wife. By the time the sun rose the next morning, my resolve had hardened. If Lena wanted to walk away, I wouldn't stop her. But I wouldn't let her take my dignity with her. I made a second call to Garrett, this time to gather what I'd need to proceed with the divorce. "If she's chosen him," I told him, my voice firm, then I'm choosing myself. It was the first time in weeks that I felt like I had control over my life again. It wasn't the resolution I'd hoped for, but it was a start. The mornings had always been my quiet time, a brief pause before the demands of the day took hold. But now they were something else entirely, a confrontation with the hollow silence of an empty house. Lena's absence was a constant reminder of the fracture in my life, one that lingered in the spaces she used to fill. I knew I couldn't keep sinking into the ache of it, couldn't let it consume me. I needed something, anything, to break the cycle. Running became my escape. The first few outings were brutal, my legs protesting every step and my lungs burning with a fury that matched my inner turmoil. But there was something cathartic about it, about the rhythm of my feet against the pavement and the steady drum of my heartbeat in my ears. The pain was physical, tangible, and it gave me a reprieve from the emotional chaos. By the third week, the runs became less of a punishment and more of a refuge. I found a trail by the river, surrounded by trees that whispered in the breeze and dappled sunlight that broke through the canopy. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of peace. The photography group was a whim, an impulsive decision spurred by an old DSLR camera gathering dust in the back of my closet. I wasn't sure what I was looking for when I joined, but I knew I needed to fill the hours that used to belong to Lena. Our first outing was at the park, a group of 10 or so strangers with cameras slung around their necks, wandering through the greenery in search of beauty. I felt awkward at first, unsure of how to approach the others or if I even belonged. But then I spotted a flash of color, a butterfly perched on a wildflower, its delicate wings catching the sunlight, and instinctively raised my camera. "That's a good shot," a voice said from beside me. I turned to find a woman standing there, her own camera poised as she smiled. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose braid, and her eyes were bright and curious, held a warmth I hadn't expected. "Thanks," I said, lowering the camera. "It's been a while since I've done this. Or, well, ever." She laughed softly. "You're doing fine. Nature makes it easy. I'm Mira, by the way." "Alex," I replied, shaking her outstretched hand. Mira's presence was easy, unassuming, and over the next hour, we fell into an unspoken rhythm, walking together and sharing shots. She had a natural eye for composition, pointing out details I would have missed, shadows cast by the branches, the way the light reflected off the water. "Do you do this often?" I asked as we paused by the lake, watching the sunlight dance across its surface. "Every chance I get," she said. "It's my way of slowing down, of seeing things differently." I nodded, her words resonating more than I expected. "I think I needed that," I admitted. Mira glanced at me, her expression kind but curious. "Rough patch?" "You could say that," I said, the corner of my mouth tugging into a faint, humorless smile. She didn't press, and I was grateful for it. Instead, she gestured toward the lake. "It's amazing, isn't it? How something so simple can feel so calming." "Yeah," I said, lifting my camera again. "It is." Over the next few weeks, I found myself looking forward to the photography meetups. There was something grounding about capturing moments of stillness, about focusing on the details that had gone unnoticed in the chaos of my life. Mira and I often paired up during these outings, her quiet encouragement and sharp wit making the process feel less daunting. She had a way of seeing the world that was contagious, and without realizing it, I started to feel lighter in her presence. One evening, after a particularly striking sunset shoot, she suggested we grab a coffee. I hesitated, the old reflex of self-preservation kicking in. But then, I nodded. We found a small cafe nearby, its cozy interior filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the hum of soft conversation. Mira ordered a chai latte, her enthusiasm for it so genuine that I couldn't help but smile. "So, what got you into photography?" she asked, cradling her cup as we settled into a corner booth. It was a spur-of-the-moment thing, I admitted. Something to take my mind off other things. Other things, she echoed, her tone light but understanding. I nodded, staring down at my coffee. My wife and I. Well, she's not really my wife anymore. Or at least, she won't be for much longer. Mira's expression softened. I'm sorry. Don't be, I said quickly, though the words felt hollow. It's complicated, but I guess I'm just trying to figure out who I am now. She smiled then, a small, knowing smile that felt like a balm. That's what photography is for, right? Finding new perspectives. I nodded, her words settling somewhere deep inside me. As we left the cafe that night, walking side by side under the streetlights, I realized something unexpected. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't dreading the next day. It wasn't a resolution and it wasn't a cure, but it was a start, and for now, that was enough. It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon when the doorbell rang, its chime cutting through the quiet of the house. I was sitting on the couch, the remnants of my lunch scattered on the coffee table in front of me, my mind drifting in a place between peace and uncertainty. I hadn't heard from Lena in weeks. Not a call, not a message. And honestly, I hadn't expected to. She'd made her choices clear, and I had started to come to terms with that. Slowly rebuilding my life in ways I hadn't thought possible just a few months ago. Between running, photography, and the time spent with Mira, I was learning what it meant to exist without her. So when I opened the door to find Lena standing there, her hair tousled and her eyes wide with an expression I couldn't quite read, I froze. Alex, she said softly, her voice trembling. Can we talk? My heart skipped, then thudded painfully in my chest. For a moment, I couldn't find words. The sight of her, the woman I'd loved so deeply, the one who had shattered everything, sent a wave of conflicting emotions through me. Lena, I finally said, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. What are you doing here? As horrified as he'd ever been. She paused, taking a deep breath as if steeling herself. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about us, and I want to make things right. I'm ready to come home, Alex. Her words hung between us, fragile and almost tentative. There was a sincerity to her voice, a vulnerability I hadn't heard in weeks. Part of me wanted to believe it, wanted to pull her back inside and pretend everything could go back to the way it was. But another part of me, the part that had spent countless sleepless nights unraveling the pain she'd caused, knew better. You're ready to come home? I repeated, a bitter edge creeping into my tone. After everything? You think you can just walk back in like nothing happened? I smiled. Her eyes flickered with something, regret maybe, or guilt. But she pressed on. I'm not asking for everything to be fixed in an instant. I need you to know that I've learned from what happened. I understand now what I almost lost, and I want to try, Alex. I really do. I wanted to shout at her, to demand answers to the questions that had kept me awake for so long. How could she have done this to me? How could she have walked away so easily into the arms of someone else, without any regard for what we'd built? But I held my tongue, biting back the anger that surged in my chest. I don't know if I can believe you, I said finally, my voice rough. You walked away when things got tough. You didn't even give us a chance to work through it. She stepped closer, her hands reaching out to me, but I instinctively took a step back. I wasn't ready for her touch. Not yet. Not after everything that had happened. I made a mistake, she said, her voice shaking. But I love you, Alex. I'm willing to fight for us, if you'll let me. For a moment, I felt something shift inside me, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she had truly realized what she had lost. But as I looked into her eyes, something in the way she stood there, so sure of herself, caught my attention. There was a selfishness beneath the surface, a lack of real accountability that made me uneasy. "I'm still not sure I trust you," I said, my words more honest than I meant them to be. "You want me to just forget everything, to open my heart to you again. But what have you really learned, Lena? What have you done to show me you're serious about this?" She hesitated, her hands lowering as she took a step back. "I've been figuring things out," she said slowly. "I'm seeing things differently now. I think I was just afraid of losing myself. But now, I know what I want." I looked at her, the truth of what she was saying becoming clearer by the second. She wasn't here to rebuild what we'd had. She was here because she was uncomfortable with the emptiness of her own choices, the consequences of those choices now staring her in the face, and I still held on her. "You're not ready for this," I said quietly, the realization settling in. "You're only here because what you thought you wanted didn't turn out the way you expected. You're still thinking about yourself." Lena's face flushed with frustration, and she opened her mouth to argue, but I stopped her with a single word. "No," I said firmly. "I can't do this, Lena. Not like this. Not when you're still so focused on you." "I want you to." Her face twisted with emotion, a mixture of anger and regret. But beneath it was something else. Something familiar. It was the same self-centeredness that had driven her to seek an open marriage in the first place, to pursue what she thought would make her happy, without ever truly considering what it would do to me. "I need time, Lena," I said, my voice steady now, the weight of everything I'd endured in the past months settling into my words. "You need to figure out who you are, and I need to figure out who I am without you. This isn't something you can fix just by showing up at my door." Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time I saw the real weight of her decision. The consequences of her actions were sinking in, and she was realizing that they couldn't be undone with a simple apology. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words almost lost in the silence between us. "I know," I said, my heart heavy but resolute. "But sorry doesn't fix this. Not anymore." I turned away then, not out of anger, but out of necessity. I couldn't keep reopening the wounds she had created. I had to close the door on this part of my life, once and for all. The decision to file for divorce didn't come easily. It had been brewing for weeks, the steady accumulation of hurt, betrayal, and the realization that the woman I'd loved was no longer the person standing in front of me. When Lena had shown up at my door, her apologies and promises had felt like nothing more than a patch on a broken dam. It was too late. What had been shattered between us couldn't be pieced back together with just words. They spent the days after our confrontation lost in thought, my mind a haze of conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was the part of me that still clung to the life we'd shared, the laughter, the love, the dreams for the future. On the other hand, there was the reality that Lena's choices had irreparably altered everything. The more I thought about it, the more it became clear I had to let go, for my own peace of mind, for my own future. Mira had been a steady presence in my life over the past few months, her encouragement helping me find clarity when my thoughts were clouded. We had spent more time together, not just in the photography group, but outside of it as well. Quiet evenings at cafes, long walks through the park, conversations that often lingered long after the sun set. She had never once pushed me, never once tried to hurry me into anything, but I could sense her patience was wearing thin. She knew what I was grappling with. One afternoon, we sat on a bench by the river, the golden light of the late afternoon spilling over the water. I hadn't seen Lena in a few days, and the space between us had grown quieter, more peaceful. But as I sat there, Mira's gaze fixed on me with a quiet intensity. "I think it's time, Alex," she said softly, her voice steady but full of empathy. "You've been holding on to something that isn't coming back. I know it's hard, but you need to prioritize your happiness now. You've been through so much, and you deserve to move forward." I looked at her, her expression kind but firm, and something inside me shifted. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words, how much I had been clinging to the hope that maybe things could still work out with Lena. But deep down, I knew the truth. I couldn't keep living in limbo. "I've been thinking about it," I said quietly, my voice rough. "But it feels so final, you know, like I'm giving up on something that mattered so much." Mira reached out, placing her hand on mine. "It's not about giving up, Alex. It's about letting go. You've given it everything you could. Now it's time to move on, to make space for the life you want, for the person you want to become." "Kikisa?" Mira said. I didn't say anything at first, just absorbing her words. The weight on my chest felt a little lighter, as if the act of simply saying it out loud made the decision easier to bear. "I think I'm ready," I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. "It's time." She stood and smiled. Mira smiled, her eyes warm with approval. "I'm so proud of you," she said, squeezing my hand. "Whatever comes next, I'm here for you. You're not alone in this." Her unwavering support, the way she saw me without judgment, gave me the strength to take the next step. It wasn't about running away from my past with Lena. It was about choosing to walk towards something better, something more aligned with who I was now. The next day, I called my lawyer. The process was cold, professional, and clinical, everything I had imagined it would be. But the moment I signed the papers and sent them off to be filed, I felt a sense of release. It wasn't a victory, but it was a beginning. Mira and I spent the evening together, her company a welcome distraction from the storm of emotions still brewing inside me. We went to a quiet bar where the sound of clinking glasses and soft conversation felt like a cocoon, protecting me from the world outside. Over the next few days, Lena reached out again, texts and calls asking how I was doing, if I had thought about what she had said. I didn't respond. I didn't owe her an explanation anymore. I had made my decision, and there was no going back. As the weeks passed, I began to feel the weight of the past start to lift. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy, but I could feel the shift in myself. I wasn't defined by what Lena had done to me anymore. I was moving forward, slowly, yes, but surely. Mira became more than just a friend. She became a partner in the truest sense of the word. We laughed more than I had in years, and she gave me a sense of stability that felt like home, even if it was still new. I wasn't sure where our relationship was heading, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I was no longer trapped in the past, no longer suffocated by the lies and the hurt. I had let go of Lena, and in doing so, I was slowly finding myself again. Soon I started to... The knock on the door was sharp, insistent, and immediately familiar. I had been expecting it, in a way. Lena hadn't reached out since the day I filed for divorce, but I knew it wasn't over. There was no finality to our relationship, not yet. The sound of their feet. I opened the door to find her standing there, her eyes swollen from a lack of sleep, or perhaps the weight of regret. Her presence was a mixture of desperation and defiance. She didn't speak at first, just stood there with her arms crossed, staring at the divorce papers in her hand. The sight of them felt like a strange form of closure, but one I couldn't fully embrace just yet. "I want to talk," she said, her voice low but firm, as though she had rehearsed this moment in her head 1,000 times. I stepped aside to let her in, my heart beating in a steady, unhurried rhythm. There was no anger left in me, no bitterness, just a profound sadness that this was the way it had come to this. "Go ahead," I said, watching her as she walked past me into the living room. She had the same commanding presence, the same grace that used to draw me in so easily. But now, that power felt distant, like something I had once admired but could no longer recognize. Lauren seated herself in a chair. Lena sat down on the couch, the divorce papers still clutched in her hands. She stared at them for a long time, as though trying to come to terms with their existence. "I don't understand, Alex," she finally said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I thought we were building something together. I thought we could fix this. Why are you doing this?" I felt the same ache in my chest, but I didn't let it sway me. "You left, Lena," I said evenly. "You walked away from me. You chose to seek comfort in someone else instead of trying to fix what was broken between us." Her eyes darted to the floor. "I was confused," she admitted softly. "I thought I needed to find myself. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you until it was too late." "All right," he said, stepping closer. I shook my head, refusing to let her manipulate the conversation. "That's the thing, Lena. You didn't realize. You never thought about what I needed, what we needed. All you could see was your own desire to explore and validate yourself, and in the process, you tore us apart." Her face flushed with the weight of my words, but she wasn't giving up so easily. "I love you, Alex," she said, leaning forward, her voice pleading now. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was just lost. But I've figured it out. I know what I want now. I want us back." I swallowed the lump that formed in my throat, the ache threatening to overwhelm me, but I fought it down. "And what about everything else, Lena? What about the man you've been seeing? What about all the lies you told me? How can you stand there and tell me you want us back when you've been with someone else? When you've betrayed everything we had?" "Lena." She looked away, her shoulders slumping under the weight of my accusation. "You can't just erase the past," I said, my voice steady, though my chest felt hollow. "You can't undo the betrayal. You can't undo the hurt you caused. And I can't keep letting you back into my life just because you realize now what you lost. It doesn't work like that." She stared at me, searching my face, but I wasn't giving her an inch. This wasn't about making her feel better. This wasn't about easing her guilt. This was about me finally standing up for myself, about putting an end to the cycle of hurt and disappointment. "I tried to understand, Lena," I continued, my voice growing firmer. "I tried to be the man you needed, but you never gave me a chance to be the man I needed to be. I've spent too much of my life catering to your desires, to your whims, and look where it got us. You don't get to come back and expect everything to be forgiven just because you've decided you're ready. That's not how this works anymore." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't flinch. I'd cried too many tears for both of us already. If I let this streak of emotion... "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words almost lost in the silence. "I know you are," I said, my voice quieter now, the finality of it sinking in. "But sorry doesn't fix this. You've already made your choices, Lena. And now, I have to make mine." She looked up at me, her face contorted with a mixture of regret and desperation. "Please, Alex," she pleaded. "Don't do this. Don't let us go. Don't let me go." "I'm not letting you go," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I'm letting myself go." I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what I knew had to come next. "The papers are filed. It's done." Lena's eyes widened, her lips trembling. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to stop her. This isn't about hating you, Lena. This isn't about revenge. It's about me reclaiming who I am. It's about me finally choosing myself after everything you've put me through," he said. He couldn't help himself as the tears ran down his cheek. I stood up then, my legs steady, my heart pounding in my chest, but not with fear, more like a quiet strength that had been growing in me for weeks. I had spent so much time wondering if I could ever be whole again. Now I knew the answer. I had to be. Lena sat there, silent, her tears falling freely now. She wasn't the woman I'd married, and I wasn't the man who would let her break me again. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Lena," I said, my voice soft but resolute. "But it won't be with me." And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving the past and her with the door firmly closed behind me. The weeks that followed the divorce felt like a blur, a strange and sudden quiet settling over everything. At first, the emptiness of the house was suffocating, every corner haunted by the ghosts of what had been. I spent days packing up the last remnants of our shared life, going through photos and mementos, each one a reminder of the past I had to let go. But as I sorted through the clutter, I felt something shift within me. The weight that had been pressing down on my chest for so long was starting to lift, I thought. It wasn't easy. It never is. But each item I packed, each room I emptied, felt like another step forward. The pain of the past was still there, lingering, but it no longer defined me. I had my own life to live now. When the day came to leave the house for good, I drove away with a sense of finality. The house, the place where I had once imagined growing old with Lena, was no longer mine. It wasn't my future. I found a small house in the suburbs, one that felt like a fresh start. It was modest, but it had character. The kind of place I could imagine building something new, something entirely my own. I spent the next few weeks settling in, painting walls, unpacking boxes, and slowly making it mine. It felt good to have space again, space to breathe, to think, to exist without the weight of someone else's expectations bearing down on me. Mira was there, of course. Her support never wavered, not when I was lost in doubt or when I had moments of weakness. She helped me decorate, picked out small touches for the house, and reminded me that this was my life now. She wasn't pushing me, wasn't rushing me. She simply allowed me to find my footing. Still, it was still a shock for me to walk back into my old life without having any direction or connection system. One evening, as we sat on the back porch of my new home, the sun dipping below the horizon, I realized just how much I had changed. The man who had once begged Lena to love him again was no longer here. That man was gone. In his place was someone who had finally learned to choose himself, someone who had rediscovered his worth. Mira smiled at me, her eyes soft and full of understanding. "You okay?" I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yeah, I'm more than okay. I'm good." She reached for my hand, her fingers warm in mine, and in that simple, quiet moment, everything felt right. There were no illusions here, no false promises, just two people standing side by side, ready to face whatever the future held. Hope. It wasn't perfect, life never is, but for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of the past finally lifting, making room for something new, something real. I didn't need to chase love anymore. I had found it, not in someone else's arms, but in the quiet strength of who I was becoming. And with Mira by my side, I knew that whatever came next, I would face it with the clarity and peace I had fought so hard to find. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was mine to create, and for the first time I felt ready to embrace it, free of deceit, free of regret, and ready to build the life I had always deserved.